As Nathaniel mentioned, my name is Robert Benitez. I'm a curator at the Lancaster Museum of Art and History and also a board member of Art in Residence. I want to take a minute just to do a quick land acknowledgement for the indigenous peoples where Art in Residence is located. And that includes acknowledging the Paviam, the Venyume, the Katanamuk, Serrano, Chemehuevi, and Kauai Sioux tribes that call the Antelope Valley home, where Art in Residence and the museum are both situated. Nicelle and I will be in conversation about the landscape around the cultural sort of zeitgeist that exists in the Antelope Valley. And we can't have that conversation without first acknowledging our First Peoples here in the Antelope Valley. I'd like to welcome Nicelle Davis to this conversation. Nicelle is a poet and performance artist. Her poetry includes collections such as The Walled Wife, In the Circle of You, and Becoming Judas. She's also the creator of the Poetry Circus and is an educator at a local high school here in the Antelope Valley. Nicelle, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Nathaniel.
This is the conversation titled Water and Walls. A little bit of context for this conversation. Art in Residence is located around 79 miles from the center of Los Angeles on the western edge of the Mojave Desert, a place of extremes that has a long and complicated history with Los Angeles, particularly when it comes to resources, electricity, power, water, and human resources as well. Oftentimes, these communities, such as the Antelope Valley, find themselves contributing these resources to the metropolis. And as you and I both know, Nicelle, this relationship is often not reciprocal. Nicelle, how does this relationship, I'm going to go into our first question here, this relationship that's often not reciprocated, influence or inspire or make itself known in your disciplinary practice?
Well, I don't even know where to begin with that. I mean, so I like to talk about our community as being textured, right? And so I think it's also a very interesting thing, like if you, like, I'm sorry, there's like part of a dog. It just looks like the ears. There's just ears here. I thought that was funny. But anyways, so what I worry about sometimes, like just from like a artist standpoint, is like we are constantly having to travel to the city, you know what I mean, as artists, instead of like sometimes it's very—
Nicelle, I'm sorry, it sounds like your microphone might be—
1 second.
Bumped or something? Okay.
Is it a little better now? No. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to leave and come back. I'm so sorry, you guys. So give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
No problem.
Great. All right.
Okay, we're going slight technical difficulty.
Yeah, I heard her all of a sudden, as soon as it was her turn to speak, like her voice got like so much lower.
Yeah. No, it's totally fine.
We just want to make sure everyone can hear you.
Zoom. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, awesome. I'm so sorry about that. Okay.
No, not a problem.
Oh, not a problem.
Go ahead and question. Okay.
Oh, hold on. There we go.
Perfect. Okay. So, Nicelle, as you know, that the relationship between the Antelope Valley and Los Angeles, that relationship is often not reciprocated. And that it's not an equal relationship between the two. So how does this relationship influence or inspire or make itself known in your multidisciplinary practice?
So I think, for better or for worse, that is actually the focal point of all of my art, is kind of like, what does it mean to be on the fringes, right? And like I was trying to explain this, I have an art group that I meet with from Minneapolis, and so they're always kind of curious to hear how I define our town. And like, to me, our town in a lot of ways is still very like Wild West. Like it's the disenfranchised part of Los Angeles County. So if Los Angeles County wants to do something that's not exactly on the up and up, I think sometimes they redirect it to the Antelope Valley. So for example, if they want to gentrify downtown, they will literally give one-way tickets to like displaced homeless, people with mental illnesses, they will literally give them one-way tickets to our town, but then they will also not give us the same amount of funding to take care of these people and make sure that they're okay. And so we have large populations of people who are living in tent communities out in the middle of the desert without water. Um, the one agency that's here to, well, there's two agencies here. And like, I'm not the expert on this. Like, this is just from my investigation, the amount of information that I have. So I know that we have Grace Resources, but Grace Resources was forced to shut down their shelter. So now it's they can offer food, but they can't offer shelter. And then the other agency up here, and I've volunteered with them, and my ex-husband actually works for them, is Mental Health Association, and MHA. But Schwarzenegger took most of their funding while he was the governor. And so, and then there's also like these weird stipulations, like if you want to have housing and support through MHA, oftentimes you have to like give up the people you are living with, you have to give up your pets. So that means like parents have to leave their kids, or kids have to leave their parents. Married couples aren't allowed to live together because one is still using drugs while the other is like trying to get clean. And so it just, I mean, that's just like one aspect of it. And then we can also, like you said, look at power, right? Like, and I don't have enough information about this. I just have a lot of questions about it. And so art is a way for me to explore those questions. And in a lot of ways, it's a way for me to call people up that I normally wouldn't. Like right now, I have a big question about water and the aqueduct and who does get that water and how many water districts are here and all those other sort of questions. So all of a sudden I have a reason to call up George Lane, who knows a lot about water, and be like, are you willing to have like, I don't know, lunch with me to talk about, you know, what's going on here? I also really worry about the solar panels. Like I love clean energy, of course, but I don't know how much of that energy we are getting. I don't think that's a real, like, I mean, it was sold to us like we'll be the first like clean energy city in California, like zero emission city. Will be the first zero emission city is what we heard over and over again. But really what that meant is our desert's just getting destroyed, right? So, I mean, the windmills are great, but all of our birds are dead. You know, like where you see the like the solar panels, like those solar panels are the same ones that 29 Palms like worked really hard to protest and keep out of their desert, because once they're there, it's really hard to build that ecosystem once, you know, once it's been knocked out. And I feel like they built most of this stuff like in the middle of the night when we weren't watching, you know. And then I mean, what else to say? I mean, how to explain my city and have people understand how much I love it at the same time, right? So I'll go to LA and I'll be like, it's a very textured place, right? And then I have to sort of explain, like, we have 4 prisons, maybe 5, depending on how you count that. We have the largest like pedophile rehabilitation center. We have the largest like battered woman shelter up here. We have church compounds. We have aerospace, you know, we have NASA, we have the military base. I mean, you can go out to Little Rock where there's like large communities of families that don't have running water, you know. We also, like you brought up at the beginning of this, like have this incredible deep history of indigenous like peoples that like the only sort of like cultural like I mean, again, like I'm only talking from my limited knowledge, right? And really all the art that I have is just questions. Like I have all these questions about this place that I love so much. And I don't understand why I can't get what's supposed to be, we're like the same county, right? Like we're supposed to be part of the same body, right?
Mhm.
So if we are truly part of the body of Los Angeles County, then why can't I get anyone to care about these questions that keep me up at night, right? Like, I feel like, I mean, I feel like I'm the right-hand gal of California, and the right-hand gal cannot get the mind of Los Angeles City to even acknowledge what's going on. I mean, that doesn't even, I'm sorry, this is supposed to be a conversation. I just got on a
No,
soapbox.
no, you're fine. I think that's great. In fact, you've touched on lots of the things that we'll be talking a little bit about in detail as the conversation goes on. You mentioned water, which is one of the major components of this conversation that we're going to talk about. So I want to give people who might be here that maybe not be familiar with the Antelope Valley some perspective around the Antelope Valley's relationship with water and what that looks like. So, and we are a desert community, which means that water is a precious resource here, probably more so than anywhere else. 10,000 years ago, when people were first venturing into the Antelope Valley was a much different place, right? We had these really large, vast, shallow lakes that supported megafauna like giant sloths. Avocados grew in plenty here. I mean, and this was also the time the first people were coming into the Antelope Valley and really calling this place home. I mean, over time though, those large lakes, those large shallow lakes would dry out. The region would eventually become a desert region, which we're used to. But what's interesting is that the geography of those dry lake beds would lay the foundation for the military moving in, for the aerospace moving in, because those dry lake beds were, for all intents and purposes, omnidirectional runways where they could test airplanes and sort of move to the sky, right? And take off, literally leave the earth here. So, Nicelle, I have another question for you along those lines, is what role has industries such as aerospace or the military played in the social formation of the Antelope Valley? And how do industries like solar and wind farms continue to shape that formation in your view?
Well, this is so, okay, I am one girl that loves my town. So like, and, and I feel so bad too, because I would love to have just like lists of facts, you know what I mean? But I'll give you what I can. So when I think about, oddly enough, when I think about the military and aerospace and the Antelope Valley, I think of Pancho Barnes, right? Because that, like, I don't know, like as a girl and a feminist, like my cousin, actually, she is a female engineer and a test pilot, and she actually teaches at the test pilot school up at the base. You know what I mean? She's also like, okay, now I'm just bragging, but I can't help it. She's so cute. She's like this blonde in this like flight suit, and she's one of the people that created the collision software, the anti-collision software, you know, that we have in cars now, which I think is so great. But there's also like this weird, I don't know how to explain it. Like the Antelope Valley still struggles with its own identity. So here we have like this like really like forward thinking like women in an industry that you wouldn't expect. And that makes me think of Pancho Barnes, who was like better than Amelia Earhart. Let's be real. Like she was the female pilot. Like she was a badass, right? And she never got any of the credit because she was so badass. And to me, that feels very Antelope Valley, right? Like had she just been a little bit more, had her edges been not so rough, had she been cute, had she smiled at the cameras, but she wasn't that. Like she was this outsider that basically kind of built the Happy Bottom Riding Club. I know this is hard if you don't know the history, but basically the same time Amelia Earhart was flying, you had Pancho Barnes. And Pancho Barnes moved out to the Antelope Valley to be basically close to the pilots. And she opened up what would be accused of being a brothel, right? It wasn't a brothel. It was just a dance hall. It was a place where the pilots could come to like drink and unwind. And she, I think, literally trained or taught Chuck Yeager how to be brave and how to like break the sound barrier. I think Chuck Yeager could not be him without Pancho Barnes, like teaching him how to survive in the desert. But then the Air Force burned down her restaurant, right? So this woman that actually sort of pushed and motivated the Antelope Valley to like I mean, the Antelope Valley does have points of like fame. It's like infamous in some ways, right? But I also think like the support systems that are there that lead it to any sort of glory, it sometimes can self-cannibalize, right? So here's the woman that built, I think, in a lot of ways, like, you know, the aerospace industry, and the military pays her back by burning down her, you know, her establishment.
Right.
So it's such an interesting place that way, you know what I mean? And I feel like because all the unanswered questions get sort of directed into our town, we have to live in it, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's a hard thing to sort of figure out, you know? And then we also kind of get all the blame for it too. Like those people don't know how to handle themselves up there. When honestly, I feel like no, like we're an eclectic group of people that have all been pushed to the edge because of all of these unanswered questions, right? So, I mean, what is the military's relationship to its community if it burns it down when it doesn't
Right.
need it anymore? That's, you know, and we need it. And I had a friend, actually, she was a reporter for the Washington Post, and she came out to do kind of like an expose on the Antelope Valley, and she just wanted to like kind of like define us as a military town. But I've lived in many military towns, and we are not like the others. I don't know how else to explain that, but that's another question. Like, why are we different as a military town than 29 Palms or Hill Air Force Base, or, you know what I mean? There's something different here.
Right,
So,
and I think for me, and one of the sort of pieces that I wrote was talking about this idea of thinking about the Antelope Valley in terms of being the testing ground, right? And the testing ground not only through like aerospace and aviation, but the testing ground on many social fronts, right? Whether that's, like you said, the county may have all of these questions. Well, let's test it in the Antelope Valley and see how it goes.
yeah.
And there's sort of this history of experimentation, both for good and for bad. But I think of like exactly who you're talking about, like Poncho Barnes and the Air Force test pilots who literally risk their lives for the furthering of scientific exploration and for the furthering of society. And again, it goes back to this sort of non-reciprocal relationship. These people are willing to risk their lives for the betterment of humanity, but there's not a lot of resources that come back to this area with a region that is sacrificing so much.
And it draws a certain type of personality too, right? Because it draws the person that wants to test. It draws the person that wants to question. I mean, and if you aren't already kind of prickly, if you live here a couple of years, you're gonna get prickly. Like I don't know, like, and and I don't I sometimes I really like it. You know,
Mhm.
sometimes I really like being rough, you know what I mean? But sometimes it doesn't serve me either, you know what I mean? And so I wish, but again, another question, right? Like, what
Exactly.
do you do with yourself? Yeah.
And I think that's true for just many facets of the Antelope Valley and what that looks like. I think of the Antelope Valley also as being like this place where things leave, whether that's people, whether that's resources, like we were mentioning earlier, power, all of the solar plants and wind farms that have popped up in the Antelope Valley. All of that power is and water that's being diverted from these areas that are on the periphery into the metropolis, right? Into major areas like, like Los Angeles, for example. And I'm wondering, thinking about us generating the energy, the water flowing through the Antelope Valley, even back to, thinking back to the mission system and all the indigenous population, all of the indigenous people who call the Antelope Valley home, all seem to be following the same path south
Yeah.
or going or leaving, right? So whether that's the the exportation of these human resources or resources like water and power. Nicelle, what kind of effect do you think that has on the region then? If there's this seems to be this constant pulling away of its resources.
Well, we talked about this All right, I'll just say it. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. So we talked about this a little bit when like we were in private conversation, but there is like kind of a pervasive feeling of shame, I
Mm,
think, right? And that worries me because I feel like that is like the worst case of gaslighting I've ever seen, right? Like LA gives us all of these complicated things to deal with and then puts like people in the city call us terrible things, right? Like there is a label and a stigma on us, right? And I feel because the resources are flowing through us so rapidly, like we feel almost like it's our fault. You know what I mean? And like when like I teach high school kids, right? And they have such a strange relationship with the place because they have great friends, they make great connections. They're definitely like when I think of you, Nathaniel, like basically turning the desert into a temple, which it is. It is for all of us, right? Like we go and we connect and we have these deep, meaningful relationships. And yet all of my high school kids are doing everything they can just to get away. And when they get away, they don't even want to admit they're from the AV. Like they'll do anything they can just to sort of get the stigma off of them. And that is not right because this is a really dynamic, interesting, vital place, you know? And so I just like that's another thing. I'm so excited that Nathaniel's working with high school students and just being like, hey, like I really do feel like it's recasting the place in a way that needs to happen, right? So, and like I can say that there's like 4 or 5 prisons and all these rehabilitation centers, but that's, I mean, you can look at that negatively, but I also find that the Antelope Valley is a place of second chances. So,
mhm.
so you're not discarded here, right? Like you could be like an outsider or feel like you've been pushed to the end, but I feel here at the end there's a lot of people that are working hard to try to give people a second chance or a place to claim they're human, you know what I mean? um
Okay.
so
No,
with very few resources, right? So with
right.
zero resources. I'm
That
sorry.
that this idea of like being pushed to the edge, I think is Mike is here and his wife Catherine is a beautiful, she's a wonderful artist, and she has this really great depiction of the symbiosis of the Joshua tree, which is really prominent here in the Antelope Valley. And that piece is called "Dance Me to the Edge." And I think if we start sort of thinking in terms of this living on the periphery in terms of being pushed, and maybe to having an opportunity to take advantage of that and to use that as empowering and maybe reframing that as being danced to the edge, I think there may be some opportunity to reclaim some of that power there.
I love
Uh,
that. Yeah,
oh,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Just even thinking of the Joshua tree, it's not a tree, it's a flower,
Mhm.
right? It's delicate, you know? And and like just how the desert grows into like a network, like the ground is alive, right? So from the seal crow to the Joshua tree, like you have to step lightly when you're in the desert because there's literally veins of living things that are
Mhm.
communicating all the time in order to literally live off of nothing, right? So because the water is not as plentiful, I think this is also really interesting too because I did have a conversation about water before this happened with a like a water expert up here, and I was like, well, what's the difference between our valley and say Palm Springs? And really like kind of we like dried up a lot of our water using the alfalfa, right? And alfalfa is such a you know, like a basically like a bedrock of our community, the farming. So while Palm Springs still has that underwater lake, our underwater lake is a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
um and then we talked about this a little bit too. Like I had a water party. I have some pictures. I could like do a screen share if you want. But I tried to do a party where I invited the 3 water districts to come and talk about water. And I just found out how much I didn't know. There's something like 56 to 67 water districts in the Antelope Valley, which I thought was a bad thing. But then when I talked to the 3 water district like officials, it turns out like that's the thing that saves us, right? So I'm on, what is that? So my water district, like I pay $75 a month for my water bill, but 2 miles down the street from me, they're paying $900 a month for their water bill. Like that's a 2 mile difference, right? I mean, it doesn't make me feel so bad because I live in a like a blue collar part of the neighborhood and they live up on the hill in the $1 million houses, right? But that's still a big difference, right? And then
Nicole,
also,
did they give you any insight into why there's that disparity between the cost of water, you know, in a
oh,
relative short distance away?
so I'm sorry, like things things go together in my head, but then I realized that I left out the middle part. Sorry. So the alfalfa fields, because of that, there's all of these different wells. So all the different farmlands had their own water, right? And then when they built communities on top of the farmland, like for example, I live on top of what used to be an almond orchard, right? So I'm living off of almond water, like farm water, right? Whereas like the newer neighborhoods, and this is true also like in East Palmdale. So like the prices of water in some of the neighborhoods that are more like, it's so funny. It's that the water bills are highest where people have the least and most money, right? And then everyone else kind of is like living on older properties that were built in the 1950s on top of farmland. And so that water is much more affordable because it's farm water. And the big talk was that they were going to bring in like basically the LA water district to just take over everything and then streamline the price of things. But that's terrifying because I mean, because like with the like little farm water, like they have backup and reserves in case there was an earthquake, where I feel if like, and this is very Antelope Valley of me, I feel if like a large water district came in, we would be screwed, right? Because we would just be under the power of like, there'd be no negotiation. I think if there was an earthquake, we'd be the last people that they'd try to figure out how to help. Sorry.
I mean, but there's
You know what?
historical precedent for that, right? I mean, we think about, we've been talking this entire time about this sort of unequal power between the Antelope Valley and Los Angeles. So I think you're spot on in lots of respects, right? Wanting to come up with a more equal, a more equitable and egalitarian relationship between what is one county, and the relationships are already so vast and so different. Just, you know, in this network of power, right, to borrow from Deborah Scacco's piece, thinking about, you know, the Antelope Valley and being really taken advantage of, and what does that look like? You know, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't want LA to come and fix us though. You know what I mean? Like I just want us to be in dialogue like we're family, right? And maybe
Right.
it's wrong, emotionally wrong of me to think of counties being a family. You know what I mean? But we're sharing a lot of resources, meaning they're taking a lot of resources. Sorry. And
I
then
mean,
giving us a lot of their problems. I'm going to be honest with you, like whatever
mhm.
they don't want to deal with, it seems to show up here.
And then I think you're hitting on sort of my next question there, which is the Antelope Valley is no stranger to barriers, whether they're geographic barriers, ideological barriers, or social ones. Can you tell us about your project, The Longest Wall in Los Angeles, and what that means to you and to the Antelope Valley?
Do you mind if I do a screen share for it? Is that okay?
Go for it. That
Okay,
works.
'cause it's more than me. Like this isn't my project. It's a
Let me,
host disabled participant screen sharing. Oh, I
yeah,
can't
let
share it.
me,
I'm
let
sorry,
me,
you guys.
no. Let me do it right now. Let's
Oh,
see.
wow. Thanks. You're so powerful.
Power of the host. Let's see. Okay, you should be good to go now, Nicole.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm good to go. You're going to see what a mess my life is, though, right now. I'm so sorry about that. Let's see. Where am I going to take you guys? Let's try this. This is actually Amazon where I'm trying to buy a book, but I'll take you to the actual place. So I just want to show you this because it would be totally unfair to say that this is my project. Like this is a full-on collaboration. So this this is located at the recycling plant up here, like basically like the scrap metal yard. And I know that the longest wall in LA, there's actually a long wall in LA, which is like a center point for social justice. So it's a place where people would make an ongoing mural about social justice issues in Los Angeles. But technically, it's not the longest wall because the wall that encases this recycling center in the Antelope Valley is longer. And the people that own it have invited local artists to come in, like graffiti artists and stuff like that, to come in and decorate the inside walls of it. So Edwin Vasquez, who is a wonderful artist up here, really dedicated to MOA. Oh my gosh, I think he bleeds MOA, honestly. But
Yeah.
he knew about this location, and okay, maybe I shouldn't tell you the story, but he's always been a little jealous that he's never been invited to be part of the Mother's Day fashion show. And so he's like, let's put on our own fashion show, right? And I was obsessed because I mean, it's really come to light how the fashion industry is actually destroying the planet, how it's like filling up landfills. It's the industry that wastes the most water. I think it's like in the top 3 industries that waste the most water. And they basically make clothes that like fall off of our body and then we throw them away into the landfill. It's like, so I was like, well, what happens when all the resources are gone? What will high fashion look like when we're like scavenging and recycling plants for it, right? So based on that idea, we like put together these outfits that would be like the end of the world fashion show, right? And so like Paul, who's our model, is actually a returned veteran who super masculine, really good guy, you know what I mean? But it was a stretch for him to put on a lacy outfit and like prance around, you know what I mean? So I love that sort of contrast of like um I don't know how else to explain it, like this sort of like hyper masculine, but it's so tender because it's also dealing with PTSD and what is your place in the world, and questioning, like he's a young man questioning what the point of life is, and how you like hold on to that hope, you know what I mean? And so I felt like he is such a incredible energy to the project. Connor Cousin, he's like a local high school teacher, like just sort of a local, like, I don't know, he's an AV, I mean, in the most loving way. Connor is a desert rat, and he like, you know, has really like sort of supported and loved a lot of people up here. Michael Jones is an incredible like spray paint artist up here, just an incredible amount of energy. Jessica Coker is like, just like, she answered an ad, I think, on Craigslist to be a model for this thing, right? And she is the most like sweet AV girl. Carly Brenton answered to the same. So Lindsay, Carly, and Jessica answered to the same ad. And it turns out Carly is like a makeup artist for, I know, some BuzzFeed show, right? So she ended up doing all the makeup for us and hairstyling too. This is my friend Anthony, who his dad owns Geno's, which means something in the Antelope Valley, right? I don't know if it'll mean it. It's like the local Italian family restaurant, right? Like everyone eats at Geno's, right? The same way that everyone gets drunk at Maxton's, even though you shouldn't, right? So, and so this is his son, and he is such just a burst of like creative energy. He's constantly like, he helped me do a project where we took abandoned warehouses and turned them into theaters, like weekend theaters, like squatter theater, basically.
That's
That's
incredible.
yeah, this is Andrea who took the photographs. And so she also is such an AV character. She's married to um, a military man, right? And then, but she herself was a pinup model for years, and then kind of had to like step down from the modeling because she had to choose between um, modeling or her family, because she was suffering from anorexia. And so now she tries to do images that are like more like um, focused on like like healthy body images and stuff like that, but still pinup stuff, right? And so, and honestly, I feel like this is just such a good little slice of what the AV is like all these different personalities from all these different places just try. And I cannot tell you, like, it felt like magic, right? Like it felt like we were taking all the things that we get made fun of for and being like, fuck you, we look great, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, while also making like sort of like a commentary about choices that we make, right? Like, I don't know if it's worth buying a $300 dress if it costs us the world. You know what I
Right.
mean?
I
So
love this idea of this sort of the Antelope Valley being really sort of tenacious and also resilient, right? Sort of this idea of reclamation, both reclamation of the waste and the refuse that is often dumped in the desert, but also sort of that reclamation of being from a place that's often not valued, because people have these preconceived notions about what it means to come from a city on the periphery. And I think the Antelope Valley is sort of at this crossroads, right? And I think that's changing culturally, ideologically, politically. At this moment, I mean, I feel like for the first time, we're seeing, and this is also sort of systemic and indicative of problems in Los Angeles, with rents becoming even more unaffordable, and people can't afford to live in Los Angeles. And of course, with COVID-19, that is a problem that has been compounded, people being evicted from their homes. And they're finding the Antelope Valley in their research about places near Los Angeles, and they're moving here. And I think what that's doing to sort of our political makeup, the Antelope Valley, of course, being like historically conservative, is changing the Antelope Valley on multiple levels, with more people of color moving into it. The Antelope Valley is historically very white. That's changing rapidly. So I guess in that sense that is sort of reciprocal, right? We're seeing resources be leaving the Antelope Valley, but also I think we're starting to see some of that come back to the Antelope Valley through that return of human resources, or through this perspective that will change the Antelope Valley ultimately. So I guess, Nicelle, sort of my closing question is, what does this mean for the Antelope Valley in dismantling some of the geographic, ideological, and social barriers? We talk a lot about even barriers within the Antelope Valley, things like the cactus curtain, for instance. So what does this new influx of people and very diverse demographics mean for the region on into the future?
well, I think we're at a really important crossroads, right? So I think that there's something here that needs to be fought for, right? To preserve. And I actually like I love the direction that it's going in. I think we have to like look at other examples, right? So the same thing happened to Riverside not too long ago, right? So when there was a how long ago was that? So I think there literally was a choice. Like you could move to Riverside or you could move to the Antelope Valley. And a lot of like the commuter families decided to take up shop in Riverside. And that really complicated Riverside in a lot of different ways. Like Robert, I know you're a student there. So like it's I mean, I feel like we in the Antelope Valley are in a very lucky position because all the choices haven't been made yet, right? Like, we as community members could actually take an active stand on preserving the parts that we love, embracing the diversity that's come to us. Like I remember there was a time when social scientists would come and study what is it, like the Little Rock area, because
Mhm.
like regular stereotypes just didn't fit there, right? So I mean, bad examples, but like the gay choir boy and the football, like I obviously don't like the football quarterback would be friends because it was such a small town, and you know what I mean. Like in diversity here, for the longest time, like it's mixed in ways that um, it's integrated in ways that Los Angeles isn't all the time, right? And that's something I would love to fight for. Like I would love, I mean, maybe that's idealistic and me just like not really understanding the like all the complications of it. But I remember as a teacher once, like I just gotten done, like, I don't know, this will only show you how much I don't know, right? So I just gotten done at Riverside, which is really focused on diversity and, you know, like issues of diversity and social justice, right? So I came back to teach at ABC and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna teach me, right? Look at this. So anyways, I'm gonna teach all of these important like social justice ideas, right? And I remember the students really liked me, but they decided that they needed to teach me a lesson. And so it's back when everyone had 3-ring binders and you'd put your pictures of your family in the plastic folds on top of the, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Like you put
Yeah.
photos, yeah, of your boyfriend or your girlfriend inside your, you know, your little 3-ring binder. They all did family trees of their families, and as an entire class on cue, because one of them was in charge of it, they flipped their binders forward so that I saw how mixed their families were. Like the diversity of their own households was just across, you know, for being such a weird Republican weird city, it's also really integrated. And so I feel like, again, these are big questions that we have to sort of, there's no answer to this stuff, but I do think there's moments of like magic in it, right? And I don't want us to lose that.
Right. Nicelle, I think that's a wonderful place to sort of leave our conversation. These moments of magic, right? We don't have all the answers and the choices haven't been made. That we're making those choices actively through conversations like this, through the work that Art in Residence is doing, through the work that I know the museum is doing. And I think that's, you know, a really important place for us to be, because I feel like we're doing the work now, right? This is where change happens, if you will.
Sure.
I think Nathaniel, if you want to, you know, sort of open it up for questions, we'd love to take any of your questions now. I mean, just sort of some points to sort of wrap up on me is, you know, being really shocked and surprised to know that the Antelope Valley, despite its shortcomings, you know, with things like redlining, things like, you know, I think, you know, thinking about the relationships in Little Rock and Sun Village, and sort of some of the long institutional systemic racism that existed there, and that being sort of dissolved relatively recently, the Antelope Valley has a real opportunity for change and to change those perspectives. So Nicelle, thank you so much for your time and answering those questions. So Nathaniel, if you'd like to turn it over and see if our audience has any questions for Nicelle or I.
Yeah, I'd like to open up the floor now. Again, Nicelle Davis, thank you for that wonderful and insightful talk. And I'd like to open it up to everyone. You guys are free to unmute yourselves. You guys do not have to use the wave your hand thing. Just feel free to unmute and share your question.
I have a question, if I can. Hi, everybody. This is Catherine. The concept about water, Robert, you and Nicelle were talking about in terms of, you know, the Antelope Valley, and really in terms of really anywhere in western parts of the U.S., Southwest in particular, it is an issue. And Mark Twain is the one who said, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. And truly that has been, you know, what we've experienced. But the use of water, and especially now that Antelope Valley is going to become more populated, and it's one of those desert communities that was considered, I guess, you know, kind of off the beaten path, just like the community that I grew up in out by the Salton Sea was definitely Nowheresville, and now apparently it's been found. But when you go back to talking about the Joshua tree, that's a plant, if we look at that as an example, that knows how to live in an area that doesn't have a lot of water. And it's pretty magnificent how it does indeed survive. So if we humans come into an area and start gobbling up the water as if we lived in Florida, I think we're being fools. And I hope that at this juncture, when we are really up against the wall in terms of our environment, as well as in terms of social justice, because your water bill and the Cal being 70 and then somebody else is being, you know, just unsustainable is definitely not right. And it has to be dealt with. And I just hope that we can somehow learn, you know, through the arts that we have to learn to live within the natural environment, not on it.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to make a big difference. And if we don't, I don't know.
Yeah, Catherine, I think that's one of the major goals of, I know, Art in Residence, but also the museum, is really establishing a cultural infrastructure to handle this influx of people so that it's much easier for people to become accommodated to the Antelope Valley and that they're aware of these issues. When they're moving into the desert, it's much different. You know, we have to be concerned about the environment because our resources are so precious.
Well, and that whole concept of alfalfa, growing alfalfa in the desert, we grow alfalfa for feed for cattle so that we can eat, you know, a lot of meat and have a lot of dairy. And, you know, I'm not saying we can't do those things, but we have to somehow gain a perspective on it. And the idea of farming in the desert is interesting. And I grew up in the Imperial Valley where that's all farming. And that's all water from the Colorado River, and we all share that. So, you know, I think art has a lot of work to do. And I look forward to what artists come up with, like you, Nathaniel.
Right.
I appreciate that, Catherine. Thank you. I have a quick question, Nicelle. You know, as a kid growing up in the Antelope Valley, you kind of touched on a few points where it's like, and Robert, you too, you had touched on a few points where it's a lot of the younger generation wanted to leave or kind of looks for a way out of the Antelope Valley, and it's something you guys kind of touched on, and that I can say that I was one of those kids, definitely, because there wasn't as much resources out here. I didn't really understand the valley in the way that I needed to understand the valley. And then coming back, you kind of start to see a sort of new perspective on this area as far as what the land has to offer, the weird political landscape that it's in, the social dynamics of the city. Do you kind of, I guess this is a question for both Robert and Nicelle, like, do you guys feel that the Antelope Valley can almost be looked at as an interesting place that could be used as a case study for what the country as a whole is kind of going through on as far as socially and politically? You know, as you've kind of stated, Robert, you know, the Antelope Valley is primarily conservative in a blue state, right? And not to kind of get into the election a little bit, but just kind of how you start to see these like really close races between like, you know, blue states and red districts within those states and vice versa, right?
Yeah, I think I can start. You know, I think about, you know, thinking about politics, right? It's on everyone's mind right now. Recently, the Antelope Valley elected its first openly bisexual congresswoman, and she was a part of the squad that was coming in, and it was totally revolutionary as a queer person growing up in the Antelope Valley to see that little piece of yourself reflected in a seat that's been predominantly Republican for the last 2 or 3 decades. So, I mean, what, you know, Katie Hill ended up resigning for whatever reasons, but that just proved to us that the Antelope Valley is changing and has the capacity for change. And I think that was really an example of seeing that in action. Growing up in the Antelope Valley, Nate, I 100%, we all have that same experience, right? Growing up here, you look around and you see what is desolate, at least what you perceive as being desolate. Everything's brown or dead. And it wasn't until I came back and started working at the museum where that brown turned golden and the light just hit everything so beautifully. And I had this epiphany, this real moment of seeing the desert in a different light. And I think working at the museum, which I'm constantly looking at things in different perspectives, helped me to see that change. And I think if, you know, the Antelope Valley does not have a 4-year university, and I think that's one of the major structural problems here, is that if we want our young people to stay here, they can't do that if they want to pursue a higher education unless they're pursuing something online, I suppose. But oftentimes people have to leave, and I think there's benefits to that. But also people have to come back too, and I'm one of those people who moved away, lived in Los Angeles, and then came back to the museum to work at came back to the Antelope Valley to work at the museum, and that's something that I really learned to appreciate the beauty here.
So I think that this is such, I mean, okay, so it's my home, so I have to be really careful, you know what I mean? Because there's definitely a bias here, and I love it here. But I do think that this is a unique place, like you said, Robert, a place where a testing ground, right? And I think things are allowed to be complicated here, right? So, I mean, the whole Antelope Valley isn't Republican, but the Republicans that are here are hanging Confederate flags off of the interstate overpasses. And they're having little Trump rallies over at the taco stand, which blows my mind a little bit. You know what I mean? So, but also complicated. So I'm going to tell hopefully a short story. So when I was teaching at ABC, there was this kid that came in, beautiful kid. I mean, just beautiful kid. All the girls loved him. They were like, oh, he's so cute, right? But there was something a little bit off about him. And when I first met him, he came in with a notebook and he's like, I want you to write your first impression of me. I do this with all my teachers. And so I wrote my first impression of him. We make it through the semester. And then at the end of the semester, we had like a free day. So I was like, how about you guys teach me something about you, right? Like we have free time, so show me something about you. And he's like, oh, I'm a professional, like lightweight boxer. My dad has been my trainer my whole life. And I'm like, okay, cool. And he's like, do you want to see my big fight? And so we put his big fight on YouTube. We watched it. He did a great job, but he got beat pretty bad. And then afterwards, he explained that he had a full ride scholarship to Stanford, but because his dad had been training him to be a boxer for years and years, and his dad was afraid of losing him, right? So if a kid leaves the AV, they're not just leaving a place. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're leaving a state of mind. And so the dad was like, why don't you just fight this one fight? You know, and after the fight, you can choose me or you can choose school. And so he did the one fight, but the one fight did like permanent brain damage. And so the kid wasn't sure if he'd be able to like last at Stanford. So he decided to go to ABC instead, try to, you know, feel better. And when I asked him about it, I'm like, so how do you feel about this? He's like, well, I didn't lose my dad. I still have my dad. And okay, there's no way to judge that. You know what I mean? There's just a whole list of questions.
Right.
And I feel like this is the place that those questions are born. And I think that they're really vital ones for us to have, like a unified nation, in a lot of ways, a unified California, at least a unified LA County, maybe, you know, like that's the dream. But I just feel like this is a place where complication gets to live, you know? And so I don't know. I like our town, boys. I like it.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I love this place.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. And then after our questions, we do have a sort of special video poem presentation by Nicelle that was requested by one of the viewers. So. Okay.
Bye, Shelly. Bye, Katie. I know it's like you guys have been great though.
Yeah.
Well, passion I get. I'm like, sorry.
Well, with that, I'd like to close this open forum number 3 with Robert and Nicelle. I want to especially thank you, Robert and Nicelle, for both coming on and sharing your guys' knowledge and this topic. So with that, I will pass this off to Nicelle to do one last screen share to share one of her video poems.
Thanks. I don't know who requested a poem, but that's very kind of you. So I don't have any of my books nearby, so I'm just going to jump online really quick. I work with I work with an artist named Cheryl Gross. She teaches at the Pratt Institute in New York. And so she and I animate poetry films together. Do you want one about the AV?
Let's
do it.
That'd be great.
This is a complicated poem though. Oh, nope, that's not it. So again, this is a collaboration. So Cheryl Gross from New York. I love her work. But the musician behind her is Robert Fisher, who was kind of a big folk artist in the 90s, right? He just passed away from prostate cancer, actually. But he's from the AV as well. So the voice and the music is from an AV musician. This might be too long, so I might do a midway stop and see how everyone's doing.
The poster reads, active shooter event. You mistake it for a college band flyer or haunted house ad. Faceless, grim reaper, no, hoodie without a face. And this is why you don't understand when 6 cops burst into your classroom, point pistols at your head, press fingers where bullets would go, say, "You're dead." Then turn towards your students, but mostly your favorite, Lisa, who you'd bet a silver dollar on getting out. Guns aim, they die. Dead. You see her for the first time. How young Lisa is, how skinny, how black. Alive, you saw none of this. Knew her by her smile, front row. She's smiling now, as though teeth could shield a bullet. The guns look at your students, and the cops say, "You're all dead." And you die again. When they leave, you lock the door, sit in the dark together, just like the poster must have instructed. After an hour, Lisa admits she's pissed herself. You walk out to see what's really going on. This is California, so the center of the building has no roof. A tree grows in the courtyard. On the first floor, mental health offices. Second floor, child services. Instructors crack jokes about one-stop shopping. You could shop here. You find yourself cracking. You think of the next 2 classes you have to teach today. Will guns attend? You think of the girl who came to class in her bra. I spent $20 for this. I want people to see it. It's beautiful. And truth, you understand $20 because you live here too. So you tell her to take a seat and you continue lecturing on how it was. The mothers binding the baby's feet, cutting off first their daughter's toes, then their heels. You teach about blood and where it comes from. You remember Miss M, just back from Iraq, on the day you read Ode to a Nightingale out loud. At the line, "Thou wast not born for death," she throws a chair at you and shouted, "You want us to feel stupid." So you said, "Outside, now." And there she fell and kept on falling, like a baby in your arms. You offered her a different assignment, a different way of talking to each other. You told her what you couldn't before. You don't know what a good chance is anymore, other than it implies something different might happen. And she asked, How can you not know? You're the teacher. She used what you taught about descriptive language in her next paper on the effects of PTSD and being raped by her own unit. Again, you see the gun, Lisa's face, and tears seem the only substitute for bleeding. You feel so full of blood you might break open. Lately, you cry all the time, mostly in your car. This is California, so you can drive away half of every day. But you're not in your car now, and Lisa's waiting in the dark, wet and ashamed. When you ask the cops, they say you should have read the poster. When you ask the cops, they say they were just having a little fun. And you believe them. These men you talked to just the other day about pumping rubbing alcohol out of your neighbor's belly. We're just fighting to keep the whole thing from going up in flames. And you thought thing as in person, when they meant thing as in neighborhood. And you felt lost at your own front door. Now you see Lisa's smile, a light that burns nothing. There's a grid you want to get on, help others get on. Lines like a road towards being counted as human. You'd give anything for your car right now, to do as you teach, bet that silver dollar on yourself and get the hell out. To be seen, recognized, not for dead, but as bleeding. You were dead, but now you're bleeding. You look at the poster the cop put in your hands. Make yourself invisible. Your life depends on it.
Yeah.
Wow. There is a lot to soak in on that.
Sorry.
Nicelle, thank you again. Robert, thank you again. That was a very beautiful ending to this conversation, and it gives us a lot to think about the Antelope Valley. So with that, I bid you all adieu, or bid you all a good night, and we'll see you guys at the next open forum.
Thank
See you guys.
so much. I'm so grateful.
Thanks, Nicelle.
Thank you. Oh my gosh.
Thanks,
Thank
Robert.
you.
Nathan.
It was
Guys.
great.
Bye, Debbie.
Bye. See you.
Bye, Dave.
Bye.